Hi guys, Grand J here, and I'm back again. So with Opus IX being fully revealed and with the set being released later this week, I'll be doing my set reviews for this set. So in today's video, we'll be talking about the Opus IX fire cards of the set. So the first fire card we'll be talking about is Irvine. He's a 4-cost backup. He is a sniper, FF8/Pictologica. When Irvine enters the field, choose one forward, deal it 5,000 damage. If the number of forwards your opponent controls is greater than the number of forwards you control, deal it 7,000 damage instead. So this card is a lot like a Fire-style Seymour and a Fire-style Sid Reigns, but a little bit weaker in that he costs the same amount, and effectively they're all designed to deal with effectively free CP forwards. But Irvine's ability is slightly more cumbersome to play in that his base damage is only 5,000. However, if your opponent does have more forwards than you, which is a pretty easy condition to meet if your opponent's got forwards on the field that you want to remove, then it's pretty easy to deal to 7,000 as well. That being said though, it's not particularly cost effective. You've already got an existing free cost Irvine that deals 6,000 damage base, as well as a whole bunch of other free CP fire backups that can do roughly the same amount of damage. On top of that, this card isn't even an EX burst as well, so there's not really a huge amount of incentive to play this card as opposed to playing a fire summon or a fire forward that can do a similar amount of damage as well. The fact that it is FF8 tag does help it out a little bit if you do happen to go down FF8 fire ice route. But other than that, this card is pretty underwhelming, and in general, it's just lacking a lot of the flexibility that cards such as Seymour and Sid Reigns have in their respective elements. The next card we'll be talking about is Ifrit. So there's a lot of people on the fence about this card. I think that this card is definitely a strong card if you can trigger off its second ability, but Ifrit is a free cost summon. She's Mobius. Select one of the free actions. If you have a total of 5 or more card named Ifrit or card named Ifrit in your break zone, before paying for the cost of Ifrit, select up to 3 of the following actions instead. Choose one forward, deal it 7,000 damage. Choose one monster of cost 3 or less, break it. Deal 3,000 damage to all forwards your opponent controls. So this is it seems like a stronger Ramu, but only if you can facilitate the drawback to it. That being said though, this card is actually really good if you can fulfill all three effects, if you can have the 5 or more Ifrit or Ifrit in your bin. That being said though, this card is probably going to be relegated to almost a purely mono-fire deck, just because you need to fill your bin with so many copies of Ifrit. In addition to that, you have to fill your deck up with a lot of Ifrit slots in your summons, which means that if you are playing mono-fire, you do have to forego playing Bahamut, especially the 4-cost Bahamut, which is actually very good in the current metagame for removing Veritas, as well as not playing Phoenix, which is also a pretty good fire summon as well as Belias, both the Gigas and just regular Belias. So you actually have to just like hardcore stock up on Ifrits in your deck. That being said, there are quite a couple of reasonably solid Ifrits, especially if they're in mono fire. And on top of that, we also have Rain, which can search for Frit, and then Frit can search for further Ifrits as well. So it's not too difficult if you do build a deck that is heavily dependent upon this strategy to get Ifrit. That being said though, Ifrit, at best, even if you can fulfill all those conditions, you do only have 3 copies of her in your deck, so you might get 3 really good summons, but you're playing a whole bunch of others that are slightly underwhelming or are just kind of mediocre or satisfactory at best. So this is the payoff for investing in a lot of Ifrits in your deck. That being said though, all 3 of these abilities are actually very solid. Of course, dealing the 7,000 pretty much allows you to wipe out any free K forward, any free CP forward. Destroying a monster is just a good option to have, especially since there are increasingly more monsters in the game. And being able to spread 3,000 damage is something that you would assume Fire could do pretty well, but Fire actually doesn't have that many things that can just spread 3,000 damage in general. So this is a pretty flexible Fire summon, pretty flexible Fire summon, and like if you can achieve the extra bonus, it's actually really, really strong. So overall, I think this card is pretty good in terms of a payoff if you can fulfill its conditions, but you really do have to invest a lot in it. So this card is probably good enough to be like locals or casuals playable, even on like a locals major tournament level, but probably not good enough to play at a major tournament such as Nationals or Crystal Cups and so on. So I like this card. I think it's a buildable card for fire decks, but I wouldn't want to really invest all my energy into building around it. Next card is the first legendary of the set. He is Ace. He's a 5 cost 8,000 power forward. He is EX Burst. When Ace attacks, choose one forward opponent controls. Deal at 2,000 damage for each job class 0 cadet forward you control. When Ace enters the field, reveal the top 7 cards of your deck. Add up to 2 job class 0 cadets other than card name Ace among them to your hand. Then shuffle other cards revealed and return them to the bottom of your deck. So this is a really cost-effective card. Effectively, if you can hit the 2 cards that you get when he enters play, he becomes effectively a 1 CP forward at 8,000 power, as well as having like an additional ability as well to just deal some amount of damage each time he attacks. So at the very least, every time he's attacking, he's dealing 2,000 damage on attack, which if you consider the fact that he's only a 1 cost 8k, he effectively costs you nothing, and he's dealing at least 2,000 damage while he's on the field by himself. It's not a bad card. That being said, though, you really do have to invest some amount into building your deck around Class 0 Cadets. I'm not sure if you need to entirely build your deck just with full Class 0 Cadets in order to make this card be effective to get you 2 cards consistently. But I would have to say that probably 60 to 70% of your forward line will probably have to be Class 0 Cadets, or probably around half your backup line would have to be Class 0 Cadets in order to get this card's effect pretty efficiently and effectively. As for his versatility, it's probably unrealistic to expect more than, say, 4,000 or 4,000 damage from this forward. If you're dealing 6,000 damage when this guy attacks, that's pretty good. But the game currently doesn't really reward you, or doesn't the metagame doesn't really allow you to play multiple forwards on the field. So having more than 3 forwards on the field is almost near impossible, especially in a deck where you don't have a particularly easy way to just spam them out. That being said, though, this card is actually pretty strong in my opinion. Unfortunately, it's kind of locked into a archetype that doesn't have enough support that it needs to sort of push itself forward. Definitely in terms of title series, this card actually seems like pretty nuts. Simply because if you use the light ace, you can use the light ace to put this guy into play, and then draw 2 additional cards on top of it as well. And I suppose in that situation, you are pretty much like fully committed to the Class 0 Cadet strategy. But yeah, other than that, this set doesn't really help it out, because I think nearly all of the Class 0 Cadets, except for like King, have both forwards and backup variants. So you actually don't have that many Class 0 Cadets in general being released this set, but they just kind of double up. So like a lot of them are being missed out. Cards such as I believe 8, cards such as like Cease, cards such as like Queen. None of those are in the set, but you have 2 Rems, like 2 Deuces, 2 Aces, and so on. So because of that, this set really doesn't give Class 0 Cadets as much support as it potentially could have, and that's what really holds back this card in terms of a constructed sense. Like we were saying, here is 2 cost Ace. It is a 2 CP backup. When Ace enters the field, choose one forward your opponent controls, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck. If you have a class job 0 cadet among them, deal at 7,000 damage, then shuffle the reveal cards and return to the bottom of your deck. This card is extremely cost effective. So as we were talking about a little bit earlier, Irvine is a 4 cost backup that can deal 7k in the right situations. Ace costs half of that, a 2 CP backup. But Ace, on the other hand, does have the requirement or restriction that you do have to play a reasonable amount of Class 0 Cadets in your deck in order to achieve it. Revealing top 5 from your deck actually isn't as swingy as you may think. So you could probably get away. With, say, 12 to 16 Class 0 Cadets in your deck to make this like a reasonably consistent 7,000 damage to a forward. That being said, though, Ace is probably the best Class 0 Cadet in the game, so he kind of has the Renoa problem of that. Pretty much the best cards are all the same character, and because of that, this card in outside of title series probably won't see play because it just clashes with the best Class 0 Cadet cards in general. The next card we'll be talking about is the King of Ebla. He is a 5 cost 7,000 power forward. He is a FF4 character. If your opponent doesn't control any forwards, King of Ebla cannot attack. When King of Ebla enters the field, you may search for one card named Queen of Ebla and play it onto the field. So I guess I might as well talk about Queen of Ebla as well. She is a 3 cost 7,000 power forward. If your opponent doesn't control any forwards, Queen of Ebla cannot attack. Same to King of Ebla. And when Queen of Ebla forms a party with card named King of Ebla and attacks, choose one forward and opponent controls, deal at 5,000 damage. So overall, you're getting 2 7k forwards for 5 CP. and you don't actually have to have the card for Queen of Ebla as well. So that's pretty good. So it's actually pretty good cost effectiveness to get 2 7Ks on the board. That being said, though, their drawbacks really hinder those cards. So if your opponent doesn't want to deal with this sort of aggression, they just don't play any forwards, right? So that's a really annoying thing about this card. So if you play this card on free CP, like on free backups in like the early mid game, your opponent doesn't actually have to respond, right? So if you play like Layla Viking in the early like 2 or 3 turns of the game, your opponent has to put down a forward to try to stop those guys or to use some sort of AoE ability to wipe them. With King and Queen of Ebla, your opponent doesn't have to do that. So unless you're playing it like when you have like just 5 backups or towards like turn 5, 6, or 7, then they're generally not going to be able to attack. And yeah, forwards that aren't able to attack when your opponent that doesn't have any dudes isn't particularly good. On top of that, the bonus effect of dealing 5,000 damage if they party attack, although you do conveniently get them both at the same time when you play King of Ebla, the 5,000 damage is a little bit underwhelming for being able to trigger a very specific party attack. So if you compare it to Yuri and Chelinka, they actually have an ability where if they party attack, you get to break one of your opponent's forwards. But that being said, I've played a lot of win decks with Yuri and Chelinka, and I have almost never been able to pull off the party attack ability at all. So I would assume that this is probably on a similar level of difficulty to achieve. And if you do manage to achieve it, dealing 5,000 damage is not a huge payoff for the drawback of they can't even attack if your opponent doesn't have any forwards, and them both being not particularly like large forwards as well. There is a very minor synergy in that the new Opus IX Cecil, he does get 2,000 power and brave if you control 2 other FF4 forwards on the field. So yes, this is a quote easy way to get Cecil to fulfill that plus 2,000 power and brave condition. But other than that, there really doesn't seem to be any sort of benefit to doing this. Most of the FF4 forwards don't really synergize or really encourage you to have multiple forwards on the field. So very few of them, almost none of them, other than Cecil, have any sort of effect where it says, oh yeah, if you control like X amount of FF4 forwards on the field, then get any sort of additional power. So because of that, there's no real reason to play this card, and you might as well just play like quote unquote real fire cards instead. And yes, next card is Queen of Ebla. We've just spoken about it. By herself, she's really garbage. So basically, if you have her in your hand, you just pitch her straight away. And yeah, the only reason why you would play her is if you get her for free from King of Ebla, and even if you do get them, they're not particularly amazing. And wow, 5k when party attacking. Ooh. Next, we have Gaius. He is a 6-cost, 8,000 power forward, EX burst. When Gaius enters the field, you may search for one card named Nero, Livia, or Ritidin and add it to your hand. When Gaius or a category 14 forward enters your field, choose on 40 opponent controls, deal 3,000 damage. So it's not bad, but it's not strong either. So he's effectively becoming a 4-cost, 8,000 power forward, which isn't particularly strong in the current metagame. Being a 5 CP, EX burst AK probably wouldn't have been too overpowered, considering how a lot of forwards are being power crept this set as well. The 3K ping is probably most helpful in Fire or Lightning, which happens to be the elements of the cards that he's searching for. And yeah, he does synergize, so if you do play additional forwards onto the field, you do get multiple pings. Yeah, so effectively you can probably consider this card of just every turn it gets to deal effectively a free cost ping to one of your opponent's forwards, because you are probably just going to be playing out FF14 forwards. Currently in the game, there doesn't seem to be any particularly spammy combos in FF14 like Layla Viking that you can really sort of abuse to get multiple pings out of this card. But definitely there's probably some sort of combination where you play Gaius to deal 3,000 damage, and then you use some sort of ability to return Nero from your hand, return Nero to your hand, deal another 2,000 damage from Nero's ability, and then play Nero to then subsequently deal another 3,000 from Gaius, allowing you to effectively kill an AK. But otherwise, overall, it does seem a little bit cumbersome to try to make use of the 3,000 damage. It's not bad. It's not bad, but it's definitely not a great card either. So it's satisfactory enough to be constructed playable consideration. In terms of the targets it does search for, Ritidin doesn't really have any additional requirements except for you having to have a 14 forward on the field, which Gaius can fulfill. Nero and Livia both require certain sort of build arounds in order to make their builds more, in order to play those cards effectively. So in order to do that, you do have to build around a little bit more. So I don't think that if you are playing a deck with triple Gaius, that you will be running like all 3 targets. I think you'll probably be playing mostly you'll be searching for mostly Ritidin, but then you'll probably either be going Nero or Livia. Probably, in my opinion, you'll be probably going for Nero just because its ping ability does synergize with Gaius is the best. Next we have Cyan. He is a 2-cost backup from FF6. He's a samurai. When Cyan enters the field until the end of the turn, all forwards you control gain plus 1000 power and brave. So at the very least, he will be just another fire FF6 backup to put into the Fire Ice FF6 deck, just so you have a wider spread of FF6 backups. Right now, currently in the game, Lock is your main reason to play FF6, and they are really locked down to a very limited pool of FF6 backups. So currently I believe they're running multiple Setzers and multiple Sabins, just in order to help them fulfill the Lock's requirement of having 2 other Category 6 forwards on the field, or 2 Category 6 cards on the field. But with Cyan, you can probably water down your Sabin count a little bit, and water down your Setzer count a little bit, just so you have like a wider spread, so you aren't drawing doubles of the same card. The worst is when you say draw double Sabin or double Setzer early game, and you really want to fulfill the 2 card combination for Lock. Now having Cyan and spreading those backups down to maybe like 2 each just makes Lock a lot more consistent and makes the Fire Ice deck a little bit less brickier. So definitely this is a big addition to that. Also, in terms of just as a backup in general, it's actually pretty solid as a mid-game play. So when both players have like 1 or 2 forwards on the field, and both players usually have around 2 to 3 backups, it's really annoying because like you don't particularly want to attack with your forwards, because if you do attack through, your opponent you don't have any forwards on defensive block, and then your opponent will be able to attack you back as well. So Cyan does give your forwards a little bit bump in power in those mid-game situations where it does allow you to attack through with your forwards, because they do get the plus 1000 buff, as well as having Brave so they can defend as well, while not actually spending any additional CP. You're basically just paying 2 for a backup as well. So it's very cost efficient in that regard. So you can, around the mid game, you can use it to just build an additional backup while allowing you to pressure for damage as well. So overall, this card is actually pretty good in my opinion, and I think there's a lot of great potential uses for it. Next card is Gijuk. It's a 2-cost forward. It's a headhunter from FF12. When Gijuk enters the field, if you control 4 more job headhunter forwards, deal at 5000 damage to all forwards your opponents control. Its power is 5000. So unfortunately, this requires a whole cast of headhunters on the field in order to do. So it's actually very difficult to achieve this ability. On top of that, he is interruptible, and so he's unreliable. So if you do happen to have 4 of the job headhunters on the field when you play him, if your opponent is able to use any sort of removal ability to then destroy one of your guys or break one of your guys, you won't fulfill that condition, and as a result, you won't be dealing 5000 damage to all your opponent's forwards. On top of that, 5000 damage to all your opponent's forwards isn't a huge payoff as well. That's generally not going to be killing too much in this game. You will generally have to combine it with some other fire card in order to then AoE for another 3000 or 4000 in order to like clear your opponent's board. So yeah, by itself it's not particularly amazing. So you'll generally have to combo with another card, and that combo can only occur after you have all the other headhunters on the field as well. So this card is just very, very difficult to achieve its ability. And if you do try to build some sort of combination with it, you have to jump 1 hurdle and then happen to have an additional hurdle of having the extra combo card with it in order to fulfill its condition. So overall, I think that this card is probably going to be the least relevant out of all the headhunters. Even though Bergen does allow you to search for 1 headhunter from your deck and play it for free, this card is not going to be your main choice. And if you do happen to have all 3 other headhunters on the field, this ability on top is just kind of unreliable. So in my opinion, I wouldn't even really rely on this guy in the headhunter deck. Might run like 1 or 2 in the deck just in case you do get to that situation. But yeah, otherwise, like I wouldn't really rely on him all that much. Next card is King. He is a 4-cost, 8000 power forward. You can discard 1 job Class 0 Cadet instead of paying the CP cost to play a King from your hand onto the field. When King enters the field, choose 1 forward. It cannot block this turn. So effectively, this is a 2 CP AK forward, which is pretty cost effective. It is a Class 0 Cadet, so if you do happen to want to build Class 0 Cadets, you definitely do want to fill up on as many Class 0 Cadets you can in order to make those scry effects or those lookout effects as consistent as possible. This card's actually like pretty good in the deck as well. Do note you can discard Light Ace to play this card, so it just says discard a card, so you're not effectively like generating CP in order to do it. It's a pretty solid like card in Cadets. It's cost effective. With this card, you could potentially build like a mono fire deck, or build a you could use some of the Class 0 Cadets from just fire itself. As just like as a mild splash if you run this king. So if you like run either the legend ace or either the backup ace, you could run like 3 copies of this king and like a couple of other Class 0 Cadets, just so you have enough to fulfill those conditions with ace, and then with additional Class 0 Cadets that you don't want to necessarily use for necessarily want to put into play, you can always just pitch them to get king in for cheap as well. So that's another potential use for him. On top of that, he also has an enter play ability where, you get to choose one of your opponent's forwards that cannot block this turn. So it's a very standard ability for Fire to do to make it difficult for your opponent to block. I guess it's just a little extra bonus on top, especially in the mid game, where you probably have, say, 3 or 4 backups, and you want, and like spending, like discarding a card to put this guy into play, allows you to apply pressure to your opponent's board when you attack through with your current forwards, and then like it keeps your backups open so you can use it to play a backup as well. So it's actually very cost efficient. It's actually a very good tempo play for the mid game. And I think this is a card to consider, even potentially out of like just purely Class 0 Cadet decks. Next, we have Clavox. She is a free CP forward at 7,000 power. She is a standard unit from FFCC. When Clavox attacks, choose one forward, deal it 1,000 damage, and Clavox gains plus 1,000 power until the end of turn. So as a standard unit, she is underwhelming, so she's not particularly great, but I suppose as far as standard units go, she's probably satisfactory, or about what you would kind of expect from most standard units. Her body's on curve, and she gets to deal 1,000 damage ping, and gets plus 1,000 power. So effectively, she can trade up into effectively 9,000 power forwards, if you ping them, as well as giving herself a plus 1,000 buff. So I'm not sure if she's good enough to outdo cards such as Archangel, the one that can deal double damage and swing for 9k. But she does have a little bonus in that her effect does get a little bit more stronger with Chelinka as well. So Chelinka does increase the damage that all FFCC characters do. So she does punch a little bit harder in combat, and she is able to ping for 2,000 damage instead. I'm not sure if it's a worthy enough synergy to warrant playing like Fire Wind Clavat, or Fire Wind FFCC with Clavat. But that being said, though, there is a whole lot of interesting synergies between the two elements in order to make these things playable. So within Wind, you have Arc that can increase the power of your standard unit power, and within Fire, you have Latov as well that can revive either a Chelinka or a Yuri, I believe. So there are some interesting synergies between the two, and if you do want to like switch things up a little bit, if Mono Wind Chelinka Yuri is probably getting a little bit too boring for you to play, then like playing Fire Wind FFCC might be an interesting change of pace for you. Next, we have Shadow. He is a 2 CP backup. He is from FF6. He's an assassin for fire. Dull puts Shadow into the break zone. Choose one forward, deal at 8,000 damage. You can only use this ability if a forward you control has been put in from the field into the break zone this turn. So this is actually a very good damage to cost ratio for a backup. So typically for Fire, Dull, Break, you're usually expecting somewhere along the lines of 4 to 5,000 damage. But in this case, you're dealing 8,000 damage, which is a very respectable amount of damage. The drawback of having one of your forwards sent from the field to break zone is actually a very easy occurrence in this game. So quite often, most of the time, your opponent will either be beating your forwards in combat, or be using some sort of removal to do it. So it's actually very easy to achieve this secondary ability, and achieve this drawback to it. So yeah, on top of that, it's also a Fire FF6 backup, which does make Lock even easier to put into play now. So it's definitely adding to the consistency, or the reducing the brickiness of the Fire Ice FFCC deck. Ice Fire FF6 deck. The one real drawback to this card is that it does require a little bit of planning to use effectively. So in general, if you are going to, like, if you want to pull this effect off on demand, you're generally, like, on your opponent's turn, you're going to have to keep both Shadow and, like, have a card you're willing to discard, or have another backup free in order to fulfill its condition. So this does telegraph to your opponent a little bit that you might plan on using Shadow's ability, and your opponent sometimes might be able to counter it with, say, Famfrit, or with, like, any sort of ability that can buff their forwards as well. So do keep that in mind, that sometimes this ability can be telegraphed a little bit. But if it's your turn and you're just running in with a guy, if your opponent uses a combat trick to win combat, your guy dies, because you haven't really committed any sort of CP or any backups for a turn, you can then use Shadow to subsequently kill one of their larger forwards as well. So this card's actually pretty good. I do like it, and there's a lot of space for this card to be played in Fire Ice, or just like Fire decks in general, or any sort of deck that wants to play Fire. So I think that this is a very good card. Next we have Fusilier. So it's a two cost FFTA 2 standard unit backup. When Fusilier enters the field, you may pay Fire. When you do so, choose on 4, deal 5,000 damage. This card is a card that's worse than Irvine and Black Waltz. You are paying effectively free CP. You're paying effectively free CP just to do 5k worth of damage. Yes, it can just be played as a vanilla 2 CP backup, but when you hedge your bets by having the option of playing as a 2 CP backup, you also reduce its, like, potency by a lot. Or maybe not by a lot, because I guess Irvine just only deals 6,000, but Black Waltz can deal a little bit more than that, and it's EX burst. Overall, yeah, paying free CP for 5,000 damage isn't particularly great. So I'm not a fan of this card, and, like, every element this set has a backup, a 2 CP backup that has this sort of similar ability where you can, like, pay a little bit more to get an additional ability, or just, in this case, get any sort of ability. But dealing 5k for free CP is not particularly amazing, and I think Fire has better 2 CP cards that I might want to be playing. In terms of, like, dealing with early game removal, Fire has a whole lot of ways to, like, ping for around that 5k mark really easily, especially on a lot of forwards as well. A lot of them in Fire can just, like, easily do 2,000 or 3,000 damage easily. So if your opponent is aggroing you with, say, like, early game Layla Vikings, then yeah, there are probably easier ways in Fire to deal with those forwards more cost effectively as well. Next, we have Nael, the second Fire Legendary of the set. It is a 6 cost 9,000 power forward. When Nael enters the field, reveal the top 3 cards of your deck, add up to 2 forwards among them to your hand, and put the rest of your cards into the break zone. Remove 1 backup from the game until the end of the turn. Nael gains plus 2,000 power and haste. Remove 2 backups from the game. Choose on 4, deal at 8,000 damage. So, from my, like, just running through the numbers, because most decks nowadays are running around 22 to 26 forwards, like, we can sort of, like, we can generalize and say the deck was probably going to be 50% to maybe about 45% forwards. And because of that, like, revealing top 3 cards of the deck, statistically, most of the time, you'll be hitting at least 1 forward. So, like, statistically, this card is going to be, in a lot of cases, just, like, a 4 CP 9k, which is actually, like, fine. He's got, like, 2 additional abilities where, yeah, it just allows you to clear up your backups, especially if you're, like, especially if you're playing a deck that's, really greedy in the sense that it's playing a whole bunch of, like, backups that have enter play abilities, such as cards like Irvine and Black Waltz and that sort of stuff that Fire kind of wants to play. The big weakness of those decks is that you aren't able to break those forwards, and, like, in the later game, they kind of brick your hand because you are drawing backups, and because you have 5 backups, you aren't able to put any new ones in play. Nael does allow you to just, like, without any costs or without any CP costs, just remove a backup in play to, like, give it a combat buff, or remove 2 to just nuke a guy for 8k damage. So, this guy actually has, like, a pretty solid, just, like, pretty solid endgame ability, in the sense that, yeah, if you do need to clear up some backups, you can do it. Or if you're in a real big pinch, you can just, like, blow up 4 backups and, like, nuke 2 guys for AK, which, like, doesn't give you that much longer to survive in the game. But just for, like, 0 CP, blowing up 2 AKs is actually, like, pretty good. So Nael, like, I think has a place in Fire. And yeah, even as just, like, a straight game ender, right? So if your opponent's just, like, if you're both on, like, high damage, and, like, yeah, if you're both on high damage, yeah, and your opponent just happens to, like, start, like, walling up with dudes, you can literally, like, put Nael into play, break 2 backups, AK to a guy, break 2 backups, AK to a guy, remove 1 backup, give this guy 2,000 power and haste. Your opponent probably doesn't have any like forward to block it, so your opponent's going to have to like chump block into it, and then you just swing in with the rest of your guys. Plus, on top of that, Nael was probably going to pick you up 1 or 2 cards as well, 1 or 2 forwards as well, in which you can like either like make further plays or do whatever. So yeah, this card is like a really fantastic finisher in my opinion. Yeah, if you just get that 5 backup stage and both players like are high on life or high on damage, then this guy's just going to come in and clean things out. So I think that this card is being slept on super hard at the moment. Yes, it's not something that you want to do in the mid game to just like ruin any sort of like further end games. Yeah, but like, yeah, if you do it in like the end games, yeah, this card is a very good way to end things off. It's an FF14 forward as well, so there is a lot of support in this set for FF14 forwards. So yeah, you can recur him using certain cards like Livia or with Sid Garland, I believe. Yeah, and the backups that you remove aren't color specific as well, so you can play them in non-fire decks as well. So yeah, I think this card is like very good. And yeah, I didn't really even touch upon the fact that like, yeah, if you get 2 forwards of this card, which is not like a difficult chance. I haven't really like sat down to run the numbers, but like I think that there's like if like half your deck is forwards, then the chances of like hitting 2 forwards of this card is, I don't know, maybe like 35 to like 40%. So like 1 out of 3 chance that you just like hit 2 cards to make it like a 2 CP 9k. So I like this card. I think it's pretty good. And I think people are sleeping on this card like hard, man. The only drawback is that people are going to assume that this is a mono fire card, but I can guarantee you that this card is like very, very solid. And I think that this card is going to see some really strong endgame, like really strong finisher sort of plays, like just blowouts from nowhere. Next we have Hume. It's black belt, but better. But black belt's bad, and Hume isn't that much better. Yeah, you can pay... I suppose I should first introduce the card. It's a 4 CP standard unit, AK forward. It's FF12, not that that really matters or anything. You can pay a fire to give it brave, or you can go fire 1 to give it haste until the end of turn. So yeah, so you can pay 6 CP to have a 4 cost AK brave. Yeah, not fantastic. Not fantastic. Yeah, it's not even a good coaster because the art's not even that great, man. Like, yeah, so yeah. Sealed, like literally sealed is probably the only time you play this card. Maybe in draft if you like want to play fire dudes, but like I don't think you want to play this card. So next card. Next we have Boggy. It's a 2 CP 5,000 power forward. It is another headhunter. When Boggy attacks, all drop headhunters you control gain plus 2,000 power until the end of turn. This card is going to probably be the main target for Bergen. So Bergen does allow you to play a headhunter from your deck for free when he enters play. So yeah, so this synergizes well. Bergen does give him plus 1,000 power, and when he attacks, he gives all drop headhunters, including itself, plus 2,000. So even without Bergen, he's a 2 CP 7k on attacking, which is fine. But yeah, he makes all your other headhunters like plus 2k as well. So I think all the other headhunters, besides from Bergen, are like 2 CP 5k, so it like pumps them all up to 7. And it pumps Bergen from 7 to 9 as well. So yeah, this is definitely the most probably the most relevant or the like most chosen target for Bergen. Yeah, so like I don't think the whole Bergen deck is particularly competitive. If you really sort of build for recursion and search, you could probably play it at your casuals. But like, yeah, I wouldn't probably take it to any sort of more serious tournament. So like the card's not terrible if you play it within its given combo. But yeah, it like the big issue with the current metagame is that right now decks need to do things very consistently and require not much deck space in order to achieve. So the biggest issue with Bergen is that it just takes up so many deck space playing Bergen and Boggy, and then cards to search for Bergen and cards to recur Bergen and so on, that you don't have as much space in your deck for just like the premium forwards and the premium summons and the premium backups in your deck, right? So that's a real drawback to playing Bergen and Boggy, right? So they're good enough cards to play by themselves, but are they standalone better than the best cards in the current game? And probably not, which means that, yeah, they aren't the best cards for competitive play, but definitely, yeah, if you want to switch it up in casuals, then yeah, this casuals or locals, and yeah, this is going to be a like great archetype to play. Next, we have Belias the Not Gigas. It is a 1 CP EX burst summon. Choose one forward until the end of the turn. It gains plus 1000 power on first strike. Draw one card. If you have received 4 points of damage or more, it also gains haste until the end of the turn. So it is 1 CP cheaper than Belias the Gigas on the condition that you don't have haste unless you've received 4 points of damage or more, which in general makes it both like better in certain circumstances, but also worse, right? So it is better in that like 1 CP is much easier to hold up in terms of backups than having 2 CP. So like when you're casting Belias the Gigas, like you're generally going to be pitching a card. So like the draw card is kind of just recouping the card that you pitch in order to use its ability. So that's if you do it on your opponent's turn. If you do it on your turn, I guess you're like tapping 2 backups for it. But just regular Belias, it's very easy to just keep 1 backup open, and you don't. And it's not like you're particularly. It's not like you're particularly wasting a lot of CP if you are just keeping 1 backup open. It's very easy to do so, and like sometimes it doesn't really like telegraph itself all that much. So yeah, it's much easier to keep 1 fire backup open, and so yeah, you can like just 1 CP play Belias, and because you're not discarding card to do so, when you draw a card, you're cantripping or you're getting the Belias cost back, right? So the actual summon cost back, like the summon card back, whereas Belias the Gigas only kind of just like recoups the card that you pitch to play it. So in that regard, Belias's cost effectiveness just like is significantly better than like Belias the Gigas's. So but in this case, you are kind of using it specifically just as a combat card. So you are just using it to either win in offensive or defensive combat. First strike is really powerful, especially considering that fire and a whole bunch of elements have ways to ping for damage. So the first strike allows you to win fights much easier in a lot of cases than you like generally would be able to, and your opponent can't just like zerg you down with a whole bunch of dudes, which potentially is kind of what happens in late games where your opponent's got like multiple like 3 or 4k dudes, and you just happen to be sitting there with 1 8k. Your opponent's just gonna like run 1 7k and another 7k into your forward until it dies. But if you chuck the first strike on him, yeah, he's just going to like outfight all of those guys every single time. So in terms of his combat potential, you're getting same combat potential, but for like significantly cheaper cost. I know it's only 1 CP, but like that's a significant change in how you like spend the CP to play this card. In terms of the lack of haste, generally for like outside of very specific decks, you generally don't need to have haste on your forwards. Because generally you'll only be wanting to pay the premium, or you really need to get the haste towards the late game when both players are like on high damage, and you just want to use it to get a forward in to just like haste in to like lethal your opponent off, or to just push through for damage. So in that regards, it kind of gives you haste when you want to give your forwards haste, which is towards the late game where you guys want to like really sort of get combat pressure in now. The only real drawback to this card that I see is that it's not particularly relevant for Fire Ice decks. So Fire Ice decks that play Genesis and Lock, having Sage or Belias to give their guys haste is very relevant in that playing a lock in the early game and then subsequently using Belias or Sage to then give it haste on the same turn and ends play is actually very good, because your opponent doesn't have a way to block it or deal with it right now, and giving it haste right now can just like send it in, right? So that's only one drawback that Belias has, is that it's not suitable for those sort of strategies, but those strategies have already got plenty of options in both Sage and Belias to give their guys haste. So that's probably the only one situation where Belias is more relevant or more useful than just Belias itself. But overall, I like this card a lot, and I think it's very good outside of that one specific deck archetype that would probably play the Gigas instead. Next, we have Bergen. He is a free CP FF12 forward. He's a judge at 8,000 power, so he is above the curve. You can only pay with CP produced by fire backups to play Bergen from your hand onto the field. When Bergen blocks or is blocked, deal 7,000 damage to a forward that blocks or is blocked by Bergen. Fire 1, choose on forward, deal it 1,000 damage. So this card has a really good cost to drawback ratio in my opinion. So free CP AK is like already above curve, but not only that, he has like a pretty sweet ability as well. In that, he's like 7K'ing whoever is like in combat with him before combat. And considering how Fire has ways to give their guys first strike in the form of Belias or Belias the Gigas, this pretty much allows it to just like outfight any forward that's in combat with, or like trade up into anything that's like much bigger than him. The drawback of only being played with fire backups does kind of hold this card back in the sense that you can't play him like in the early game. You do really like the earliest you can really play this is in the mid game. You need to have at least 3 fire backups down in the mid game in order to play this card. But that being said, though, it's actually a pretty good payoff for what it does, and it applies a pretty decent amount of pressure as well for what it does. On top of that, he also has like the ability to just like pay fire 1 to deal an additional 1,000 damage. So a lot of forwards happen to be around that like 7 to 9k range. So if Bergen is being blocked by an 8,000 power forward, you can just pay the extra fire 1 to deal an extra 1,000 damage as well. Not only that, it just like kind of synergizes with a lot of forwards that already deal like a good amount of like ping damage. So if you are playing a card like Irvine that's like hitting for 6, you can always just like spend an extra fire 1 to just deal that extra 1k to get over the top and kill that 7k and like etc. with all your other like fire summons and backups as well that just like do damage. So overall, this card has like a good set of abilities and a good body for the drawback of its cost. So I think amongst older cards that have this similar sort of drawback, such as I believe it's Estinian has this drawback, and White Tiger Lassie Nimbus, I think. They all have the same sort of they all have the same sort of restriction. But I think Bergen's ability to deal 7k, which is a big packet of damage. Like very few fire forwards have that sort of like amount of damage that they deal when they're attacked or blocked. So it's actually like pretty good. Not only that, fire also has some like interesting like synergies or combos with it. Not saying that you would do these particularly often, but cards like Illusionist or like Sync can force your opponent to either attack or force your opponent to block, which does allow Bergen to just like step in and then like deal them 7k as well. So those are just extra things to think about. But I probably wouldn't particularly focus on using these sort of strategies or effects, but they are just like a fun thing you can do to troll your friends at your locals with it. But Bergen I think is very solid. Bergen I think is very solid. Like definitely like locals worthy. Probably too restrictive for a high level competitive players, considering that they're like kind of other stronger archetypes that they are pushing into the game right now. But if your locals is pushing some sort of like mono element weekly event, then this is probably a good inclusion for your mono fire deck. Next we have Bomb. It is a 2 CP forward, it's a 2 CP monster. Its ability is during your turn, Bomb also becomes a forward with 5,000 power. When Bomb is put from the field into a break zone, deal 2,000 damage to all forwards. So this is another monster type or monster archetype for this set. So basically all the monsters in this set, they all are monsters during your opponent's turn, but they're also forwards during your turn. So they're both monsters and forwards during your turn. So in this case, Bomb is a 2 CP 5k, so it's like kind of on curve, if not slightly below curve, for what you would really expect out of a 2 CP forward. Its ability of, when it's put from the field to break zone, deal with 2,000 damage to all forwards. It's annoying that it blows up your forwards as well. That's just kind of like an annoying drawback that I guess the Bomb archetype just kind of has, in that like it can blow up your guys as well. That being said, though, like effectively it just like allows it to trade into 7Ks, pretty much only when it's attacking, because it can't block, because it's not a forward during your opponent's turn. So it's a really awkward like 7k packet of damage, like if you sort of consider it in that way, because you just like run it in and your opponent blocks it with like a 7k, and then like you bomb to do 2k to all your opponent's stuff. So I'm not really sold on this card. It's really awkward to get the 2,000 damage off when you want. Effectively, unless you got a way to sack your own bomb, pretty much you're only getting the 2,000 damage when your opponent chooses to give you that 2,000 damage. So your opponent can potentially like play it against you. So your opponent can potentially block the bomb in specific instances where they're going to follow up with like a nuke on one of your larger guys, or some sort of like AoE ability such as Valor 4 or something, right? So because of that, like there's just kind of like too many drawbacks, and the benefit of playing this card is just like too weak to really not justify it. The only one saving grace for this card, it's not really a saving grace, only like one positive I can see about this card is that it is a card named Bomb. So it's another bomb that Fire can search for using Mirror. So bombs die, you use Mirror to tap herself, and you can search for another bomb from your deck. But other than that, he's just like, he's not good. He's not good. There are better bombs in this game. I haven't really looked at them because I think they're all kind of bad. I probably say that every set, like there are better bombs in this set. Whereas like, yeah, but if you like look at each specific fire set review I do, like probably every time I say that, like older bombs are bad. So yeah, so this bomb is not good. I don't know, like maybe someone can prove me wrong, but I am pretty confident that no one will. And the last card for the fire element is Ritidin. It is a 2 cost 7 cost 2 cost 7k forward, so it's a little bit above curve. It's a FF14 card that can be searched by using Gaius. Its ability is you must control a category 14 forward to play Ritidin onto the field. It has Brave, so yeah, it's actually like what you would expect from a Earth type forward. So yeah, being 2 CP 7k Brave is actually pretty good. And its drawback of you requiring a 14 forward on the field is actually pretty easy to achieve. It's not like your opponent can really sort of like do anything in response. So as long as you've just got a FF14 forward on the field, you can just put the Ritidin in play. It's not like your opponent can like blow it up in response or anything. Or even if you just happen to have another FF14 forward, you can just like play that and then play the Ritidin straight away. Your opponent doesn't really get any priority. So yeah, so there's no way that your opponent can really sort of prevent you from playing Ritidin, given that, yeah, you have a forward on the field at any point. Its S ability is Magitech Missile. For S Dull, choose one forward. At the end of this turn, if you control Ritidin, deal it 10,000 damage. So this is actually a pretty cost-effective S ability. The things that really do draw this card, that really sort of do hinder this card, is the fact that there is only one copy of Ritidin in the game at the moment. So like, yeah, so you only have maximum 3 copies in the deck of this card. And yes, it creates some very interesting like mind games. So I don't know if if some of you guys, maybe some of you high level players might have experienced this, right? Where your opponent's keeping CP open to Yuri at the end of your turn. But if your opponent does that, it means they're all tapped out, which means they can't respond to stuff you want to do. So sometimes you have a play that can be countered by Yuri, and your opponent doesn't want to Yuri because it commits their backups. So yeah, so it's sometimes you just like, you have to end your turn, hope your opponent uses the Yuri, and then you like counter with your ability, or vice versa. And sometimes your opponent just like ends the turn without using Yuri, right? Just so they have those backups open. So I guess Ritidin kind of does a similar thing in the sense that you can do this during your opponent's turn, right? You can do this during your opponent's main phase too. So when your opponent's just like, oh yeah, end my turn, and then you can be like, oh yeah, before you end your turn, I do Magitech Missile. So now, after your opponent's just like kind of committed to like not doing anything for the rest of the turn, then it's like, oh yeah, cool, I don't really want to pitch extra cards, or I wasn't expecting you to use Magitech Missile. Do I want to pitch 2 cards to kill Ritidin, or do I just let you do 10k to my guy, right? And the dull cost doesn't really sort of affect him because he is Brave as well. So yeah, you can swing with this guy and then like use Magitech Missile later on the turn as well. So that is a consideration. In addition to that, like yeah, there's also the mind games of, oh yeah, if it's your opponent's if it's your turn, and then like let's say if your opponent's got like heroic Riku, and at the end of the turn it's always like, oh yeah, tap 2, use heroic Riku, mill 1 card from the top of your deck. If your opponent does that, and then like, yeah, cool, now you can do Magitech Missile, blow up on the guys, and your opponent doesn't have the 2 CP backup, to the 2 backups that they use to cast like additional summons. So like, yeah, if they have some sort of removal ability, like let's say they have like Chaos Walker of the Wheel or something, now instead of like tapping one of those back and discarding card, they have to like discard 2 in order to like blow up Ritidin. So yeah, against good players, this card like actually creates some really fun, like interesting, like mind games. And yeah, because of that, those are the sort of cards I like. It's a real battle of wills, and who can really sort of like mind game the other opponent to like bait themselves into not protecting shit or not killing Ritidin. So yeah, so like it's a fun card. It's not a bad card. I think it's a solid enough card, especially if you're running it with Gaius. And FF14 have some pretty good support this set as well. But like, yeah, I just love the dynamic it places on the game, especially with that S ability. So yeah, I hope you guys give it a shot, give it a try, and you guys might understand like what the hell I'm talking about in regards to Ritidin. So that's my review for the fire cards of Opus IX. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If there's any cards that you think I've overrated, underrated, or do you have any comments or feedback, do feel free to put them in the comment section below. I do respond to you guys, and I'll be putting up my Opus IX Ice video up very, very soon. So until next time, Grand J out.